Hello everyone, I'm Peter Dahl. I'm an Azure MVP. I'm part of the crew that made this event happen, and I was so lucky that I got the opportunity to present along one of my customers, Nordic Aviation Capital. Today we're presenting a story behind Nordic Aviation Capital, how they moved from hybrid to native cloud. And if you have any questions along the presentation, just yell out loud because I want to give away some Lego Star Wars keychains. So how many of you actually attended the Han Solo movie yesterday? Was it great? Good. So let's kick off. So this is Mads, and I'm Peter. Yeah, it's blown up inside. Yeah. Yeah. I'm the head of IT in Nordic Aviation Capital, which is a company based in Billund. So just go ahead and I'll tell you a little bit about who we are. Just run through the
introduction.
So, as Mads mentioned, he'll just make a brief introduction to what is Nordic Aviation Capital in a short moment. The agenda is basically just we run through where we came from a hybrid scenario, which many of you actually are talking about doing today, where we actually made the journey, or they made the journey about 4 years ago, and how we actually transitioned to a native cloud. The experience along the ways, what issues we have had, what systems we have chosen to move to, and basically all of that. And to end off the session today, before lunch, we have a raffle. So if you're so lucky, you are welcome to attend the quiz later. That we actually have a prize for the guy or the girl that actually is able to answer the questions in the quiz later. So you can stick around later after the session is finished. But let's give Mads the opportunity to present Nordic Aviation Capital.
Yep. As I just briefly mentioned, we are a company based out of Billund. We are a 27 years old company with one owner up until a few years ago. We started out in a small airport in the middle of Jutland in Skive many years back, and we do aircraft leasing and financing all over the world. As you can see here, it was founded in 1990, and in 2004 we moved to Billund. And if you ask me, everything that actually happened after 2004 is not that interesting. It's definitely where we had our growth rate, and we opened a lot of international offices and all that. But before 2004, we did a lot of business in Africa doing first aid flying and stuff like that. We have a lot of good stories on that. But anyways, we've had some success stories, and in 2015, 66% of the shares was acquired by a capital fund. So that's our owners now, and we're actually 14% of the company is actually owned by the family behind the Lego group. It's they own practically all of Billund. We have around 425 aircraft at the moment. It's not today's number, but because it just keeps on growing. 70 customers, it doesn't seem like a lot, but it's airlines all the way from Lufthansa, SAS, to small Indonesian companies that just fly between the islands. And so we have a lot of different customers, but not a lot for a company this big. As you can see, we have a balance sheet of $5.8 billion US dollars, which actually makes us one of the largest companies in Denmark. We have 250 employees, and then we have a lot of people also in the company that are not employed, but work for us as consultants.
Yes, one thing that I also can point out is that you plan for in 2019 to have around 600 planes as well.
Yeah, that's.
So-
I actually heard that the founder set it up for 750 aircraft. By the end of this year, actually.
That's amazing. It's explosive growth they had down there. When I started around 1.5 years ago, they had around 250 planes, and then it just exploded from there. So it's amazing to see the growth. They had around, I think, around 100 plus employees. And they are already doubled in size. So it's explosive growth.
Yeah, this, as you can see, and it's not that I'm going to go into much detail about it, it's just to show that we are also an international company. And I think that for the travel that we did on the cloud journey, it shows a little bit about scale and how you can go out in the different areas of the world. So yeah, we are based in, we have a big office in Limerick in Ireland, and of course in Billund, Singapore, Fort Lauderdale, and Toronto. So that's where we have our regional offices, and then we have these satellite offices all around the world as well. So,
And people are working all over the world. They even have people working from Africa sometimes and so on. So they are quite remote, many of the employees. So we see activity all over the globe where they actually visit customers and so on. And
yeah, just
to name a few.
brief overview of some of our clients. I guess hopefully you know a few of them. Yeah, and this is where they're all located. So we're, represented all around the world. At the moment, we see a big growth rate in Asia and in South America as well. It's really taking off those places in regional flight. So if we look at what kind of aircraft we deal with, this is our fleet, or that's what we do most of. And it's a regional aircraft, which means it's from a 40-seat aircraft up to 110 passengers, just under what 737 basically. If you go above the 737 and up, 747, 777, and so on, it's a whole nother ball game. And there are many other leasing companies that are in that space. We are the 5th largest aircraft lessor in the world, but we are the largest when you look at regional aircraft, which is for some reason not an area that our competitors want to go into. And one of the reasons for that is you need to inspect these aircraft quite so often, and the larger your fleet is, the more complex that's going to get. So there's we could have the same balance sheet if we take 6 Airbus 380s, but of course the risk is also much higher if somebody goes bankrupt. So this is the fleet.
So just to put a couple of words on where they actually came from, I hope that some of you actually have similar setups or have seen similar setups in your environment or at your customers. At Nordic Aviation in Billund, they have a Hyper-V setup, or had a Hyper-V setup, where they have 2 different data centers, 2 different sites within Billund, where they actually have a high availability setup, where they have failovers between the 2 data centers within Billund. This was in 2014, and at that time they decided to actually extend the on-premises data centers to Microsoft Azure as well. I actually don't know whether or not, did you have satellite servers around the world as well?
Yeah, we did.
So you consolidated to Azure at that point?
Exactly, yeah. We tried to, basically what we try to do is to leverage, the network of Azure. So making the connection faster for people especially in Singapore and in the US, so that they could access all of our applications much faster than just using a VPN with a Cisco client. So we had an on-premise domain controller file server, and then we had an Azure as well in the different regions. So we had a domain controller and a file server and a direct access in North American and in Asia as well. So when our clients connected, they connected to the site nearest to them. So that was the
So basically a regular enterprise set up in that way in 2014. So they, I don't think you can see it down here. There are around 17 servers, 70 servers, a mix between Azure and on-prem in 2014, and had a mix of different infrastructure, as Mads mentioned, a high stake in configuration manager, a high stake in virtual machine manager to handle failover, and also using operations manager for monitoring. They had different kind of applications running on their on-premises and also in Azure, but at some point they actually decided to extend these in Azure, as Mads mentioned. Microsoft actually made a case in the summer of 2014 based on Nordic Aviation Capital, because they were one of the first companies in Denmark to actually make a hybrid setup across many countries in the world using Azure. And as Mads also mentioned, they actually used the internal infrastructure in Azure to route traffic from one country to another country. That was in case that they should from Singapore have contact to US, they use Microsoft backend infrastructure to actually communicate with the users in US or the servers in US. So a very fast infrastructure, low latency that uses Microsoft infrastructure. So just to give you some insights into the complexity of the network infrastructure that we're talking about, where they actually came from. So basically, this is a drawing of the entire infrastructure within Nordic Aviation Capital until sometime around November last year. We have something similar still configured, but we're trying to move away from this because this is a very complex scenario, also to handle from a network point of view. So you should probably have something similar in your data center with failover. In case one data center fails, it's actually able to actually fail all the time. So.
You could argue that for a company our size, that 70 servers and 200 employees is a quite high number, but we are, as I said, we are quite a large company if you look at the finance, and we do have the same regulations as if you're in a financial institution. So we actually had a need for having the same infrastructure as if we had 2,000 employees. So that's the reason we have that many. And because we like to play around with all the new technologies.
So they were actually also one of the first in the world to actually have a Citrix environment in Azure. It was actually promoted or deployed by TIA a couple of years ago. We had it running for like a half a year, then you changed the scenario to it's going so fast in the cloud these days. So when you've actually implemented something, it's already basically deprecated from the point that you're finished with the installation. So things are just moving ahead rapidly in the cloud, and that's what we are seeing, and that's impacting everything that we're actually doing these days in the cloud.
It was actually one of our first initiatives was saying, well, we had our Citrix on-prem environment for some applications, and we said, well, could we move that to Azure? And Citrix said, well, that's not supported, but I said, well, it's a virtual machine, of course you can put it there as well as you can put it anywhere else. So we tried doing that, and we worked with Citrix, and we got it up there, and we got these Citrix servers in each location as well, so it was low latency. We actually never really deployed it. We got it working, and then we actually shut it down. Eventually, I said to one of my guys, just remove it because nobody's using it. And then a month later, ATEA came and said they were nominated for the Partner Award for the most innovative setup. And they came with, Citrix came with cameras and had to do a documentary about the companies. We had to turn it on. They actually never used it.
Don't tell anyone.
That's a good movie though.
We actually had to turn on the environment just because it came. So some of the pains that we heard from the users was basically direct access is sometimes unstable. They had difficulty reaching the infrastructure internally. Sometimes the direct access infrastructure was unstable due to, for example, certificates. And during the migration, we're actually going to cover that, but we actually have a root certificate that expired that actually caused a lot of issues around this environment as well. We also saw slow logon times. I don't know how many of you are used to that in a domain environment where we actually have around 2 to 3 minutes sign-in experience from an end user point of view. And these were some of the challenges that we were actually trying to solve with the next step and moving ahead. And originally we actually started by removing Exchange hybrid server, which at that point actually wasn't supported by Microsoft. You could probably also read a lot of white papers. They don't actually support it today, but it's possible to do. So when we actually got that going, and we actually also managed to remove the what is known as Active Directory Federation Server, or ADFS, to sign in. They had 2 servers in Azure, 2 on-prem, but by moving actually to Azure password hash sync with a single sign-on, we were actually able to actually move complexity from the infrastructure. So in case anything went down on premises or in Azure on the compute side, the user will still be able to actually sign into Office 365, all other SaaS applications that was actually provided by the company. And based on that, Mads and I actually started discussing what's the next natural step from there, and what would we do for making it a better experience for the end user, and could we actually move everything to cloud. And yeah, I have a couple of other points that didn't come. We had some challenges with patch management and also bad experience with some of the applications due to latency and so on. But this has actually led to a vision that we actually had around actually making the entire company cloud-based, cloud-native, actually moving both servers to PaaS and SaaS services, whatever was possible, and trying to remove over time all the limitations that were in the infrastructure and also on the application side to actually make it cloud-native.
I had a very good employee. Of course, we have a fairly small team. We are 12 people in our IT department, where half of the people are developers. So the other half is for infrastructure. And I had a very good guy who'd been in the company for 7 years, the first employee, and he helped set up this environment. And then all of a sudden, the bastard found another place to work. And I got really afraid of our infrastructure, because it was everything. We weren't that good at documenting, and everything was in his head. And I was like, okay, what do I do now? As you can see, our network drawing, and you have certificates. We had a DNS, we had DHCP, we had all of those things. And to be completely honest, I lost track of all of the stuff we had running to support the organization. So one of the visions behind this was also, how can we lean the infrastructure and make it so simple that even I could actually manage it if everyone else was out sick, or I could at least call somebody like Peter and say, well, we need some help. So that was one of the visions as well, reducing the risk of course, key personnel, but also just creating some high availability by not having that complex setup that we use.
So basically simplifying the infrastructure, making it easier for them to maintain the infrastructure and actually reduce every part of both the network and the infrastructure part, the dependencies within the design and the infrastructure itself, and also make it easier for rapid deployment or development from developer. They actually have an in-house development team that actually works on a homemade CRM product, which is known as Shamrock. And they actually decided to move this application, which was actually running on 2 different servers, a SQL server and an IIS service, a web server.
Even that is complicated.
Yeah. So we actually challenged them to actually move this to Azure, and they actually was able to actually move the application to Azure within a week. They had 2 challenges basically. That was actually getting the integration with Azure Active Directory to work, And after they actually solved that, we were actually able to also move the database and the website to Azure within a week. And after we had actually moved the application to Azure, we actually got a large amount of feedback from the end user customers that actually had better experience from navigating around the application CRM, better response time, better experience all around. So that actually also challenged us to actually move more into the cloud and keep on investing. So after actually doing much of these migration, we actually end up in the setup much like this. You've probably seen some similar drawings from Microsoft, where the entire infrastructure actually based around Azure Active Directory and the identity of the user. We have covered from end-to-end cloud, where we have the devices that is Azure Active Directory joined. So when the user sign in with their cloud identity, they will actually get single sign-on applications to the entire infrastructure in the cloud. We don't have any on-premises or any non-web-based application running at all. And those that we have running is running now in a legacy environment in the cloud, in a remote desktop service environment. And the grand vision here is, as Mads mentioned, actually to simplify much of the infrastructure, both from a network point of view, but also from an application point of view. So what we actually done is that we actually focus on the identity of the user and actually focused on the business and the innovation part. So now we're actually removing all of the complexity within the network infrastructure. So basically what the user need is basically just an internet connection. We use Meraki to manage the network, monitor the network. And Mads is actually able to actually do this himself with an application on his phone. So it's very simple for him. And this is also tied into single sign-on in Azure as well. As you see up there, we also have third-party application, which also was mentioned on the previous slides. We moved all of the file servers to Dropbox. That also seems a bit bold because they are not used to having 7 terabytes of data and more than 20,000 files within one Dropbox, apparently. They struggle to actually cope with this amount of data. So we're still left with a bit of challenge on how we're actually going to manage this in the future. We're actually working with Microsoft on a future solution to actually make this more simple. On the print server side, we actually went for a cloud-only solution because Microsoft currently doesn't provide a solution for cloud-only scenarios. They only provide hybrid scenarios. So we went with a product called Printex, which is a Danish company. They actually have cloud printing directly provided on the client side, which does not require any print servers at all in the cloud. It's a PaaS service.
Yeah. Why did you choose Dropbox instead of OneDrive?
Well, different reasons. So what we wanted to achieve was like when you have your normal file sharing drives, and especially for aircraft documentation, it's so old-fashioned you can't believe it. If you have a 10-year-old aircraft, you have like 4 pallets with boxes of documentation in pages that needs to be scanned in order for us to secure our asset. And so we have millions and millions of files for each aircraft. And OneDrive only have support for up to 100,000 files. After that, they say, well, it's gonna slow down the computer. Dropbox says they can handle 500,000 files, but the issue that, of course, we found that after the migration. And we actually have users that have access to more than 6 million files, and the indexing of all those files for search and stuff are done locally. So it slowed down the laptops tremendously. And that's the amount of files is also one of the reasons that we didn't go for a team site or something like that in SharePoint, because simply getting stuff up there was.
You can't use Teams.
Not for that purpose that we're using. We're actually looking at putting in our own developed product instead, using some of what we heard in the keynote actually, on getting some intelligence with AI and machine learning into our documents because we have so many of them. So that's one of the resources we're looking at.
Okay, just because I'm from Nevia, so we've got the same problem with documentation.
Yeah, there you go. But yeah, maybe we can sell our product when we are finished developing it.
We'll let you planes land and then
No, what we were actually looking at is because we have so many documents, but we also have a lot of contractual information. We have around 56,000 documents that relates to something legal, like registration documents or lease amendments and lease documents and all that. So we wanted to try and create, that's a whole nother product. We wanted to try and create like a mesh. So we have a lease contract that connects to an aircraft serial number that connects to part numbers that, so that's what we're working on at the moment.
Yes.
Why don't you use the storage blobs with indexing servers and search services from Azure? Why don't you use this opportunity to fulfill your needs?
We're actually working on that right now. So
Okay.
we started working on that.
The
Yes.
56,000 documents that we have in our own developed system, we actually use blob storage and are looking into Azure Search as well, and also some Google products.
Is it working for you? Is it does it give your an answer for your questions you have? Can you find your files and your connections like e-discovery?
The biggest problem, I think, is actually a reliable backup solution for blob storage.
That's what we're facing right now. We don't have any. We haven't started actually working with the search part yet.
Yeah.
We're only storing files and doing versioning in the blob stores as well. But the largest challenge that we actually face is handling these amount of data and also doing backup between containers or having a product that actually can perform a proper backup between cloud services actually, because Mass has a requirement, their entire business around running this business around these documents as well. And they would like to actually store them elsewhere, not just in Azure, but also in another cloud or on-premise. And all the products that actually tried or evaluated was actually discontinued for some reason. We use something called a cherry backup solution, if you know that. It was in between, they could actually sync between Azure Blob Storage to Amazon, so we didn't actually have the need for actually storing everything on premise, but we could actually remove all of that to another cloud window. So in case anything went wrong, they could still actually run their business afterwards. So, but we're trying to actually use backup solutions within in Azure, but currently Microsoft doesn't supply backup solutions for blob storage themselves, only for Azure files.
Oh, Azure files. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Any other questions? Up there?
Registering through the file sync. File sync.
Azure File Sync?
Yeah. Are you testing?
No, we are actually aren't, because that will actually rely on, as far as I know, on-premise file server, and we're actually moving away from file servers. The lack of support for Azure authentication within Azure Files is a huge issue for us. If they actually provided such a solution from Microsoft, we will actually consider moving a large amount of our data to that solution. Does that make sense?
With Dropbox, the information is not provided.
So the issue here is the devices that we're using are not domain joined. They're not at Kerberos aware or NTLM aware at all. They're cloud joined. So we can just spin up a file server and use that way around to actually solve the issue. So we don't have any servers. And Azure File Sync will actually require us to have a file servers, as far as I know. And also Store Simple for that matter. Any other questions? Yes?
I noticed on the next slides you had Azure AD DS listed.
Yes.
That's very rare to see in
Yes.
production.
Yeah.
What's that being used for, and what are the issues?
That's actually to bridge the gap between the legacy application that we couldn't actually move to cloud. So what we're using this for is mainly to run the remote desktop server, and also to give users an HTML access to a legacy database, a financial database called C5, Navision C5 from probably Microsoft, and we have to keep that available for 5 years for accessibility purposes. We also have a specific certificate on that server to allow them to sign into some flight registry service provided. It's called K-Town. Yeah. So that's the reason why we actually have it, to actually cover these scenarios. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So basically, a replacement for on-premises DCs.
Yeah, for all the servers that we can't actually remove. So we have like 2 or 3 servers that we can't actually remove. They require some kind of domain infrastructure. So just to bridge that gap.
Until they create a server, you can Azure join.
Yeah. So we actually spoke to the product team. They have no plans, as far as I know, to actually do that.
What do you mean a server that you can Azure join? Can you do that with server 2016?
No. It could be hybrid joined. That's another thing. It could be hybrid joined where it actually have both the domain join and the Azure join part within it, but it requires the domain part. It cannot solely be joined to Azure.
Right.
So if that was the case, we actually didn't need, for example, to use Azure AD domain services.
Right. Okay.
You would also use the ADS for group policies on that server?
Yeah, we actually don't use group policies
really?
in that scenario because we're trying to keep it very simple. So the out-of-the-box scenarios that's used. We have 2 servers running currently, so
Yeah.
It's only for remote desktop services, basically.
Okay.
So keeping things simple.
How is it dealing with the IT team? Because I mean, they've been used to working completely different. What was the feeling like?
We have a slide.
All right,
Yeah, great question. So, from a user point of view, whenever they need to access a resource, an application, they'll actually go through Azure Active Directory and also get faced with conditional access, which actually require them to actually come from either an Intune joint device or a device that actually is issued from NSC. If that is not the case, they can still actually work remote, but they'll face an MFA question they actually need to answer, or code they have to provide. So it's very secure, and depending on which application we're actually providing access to, we can granulate that level of access to the applications. So yeah, this is basically how we actually control access to the cloud service that we provide. So just to show you a drawing of how we actually done this, we're actually joining all of the devices within AC. They can sign in with their Azure AD credential, and after that, they're actually able to sign into all the applications within the company. And the next slide, that's probably me.
Yeah. It's 2 very important things in the IT department. It's the coffee machine, and then we have this counter on top. It's just basically for fun with the IT supporters, because to do this, we were still reliant on our on-premise infrastructure because the machine's still logged onto the domain controller, even though we put all of the applications up as into the cloud. So we used this to show the guys that they needed to reinstall all laptops, and then Azure AD joined them. And they just sent me this morning actually that it came down to 0 now. So it means that we have completed the journey, that now all of our clients are Azure AD joined, which means that they have no dependencies on any server or on-prem infrastructure anywhere.
So this actually allows us to actually remove the rest of the domain controllers on premise, actually make a DC program. We actually tried to actually convert several times during this challenge so that the clients and users was completely cloud only. Moving back and forth. The biggest challenge we had is like basically a couple of file servers that still have to access. And for that reason, we still have to keep the identity of the user on premise, because in case the password actually expired on the on-premises user object at that time, and they wasn't actually able to actually change the password using the cloud device, on-premise or have the right back. So the conversion that we've done a couple of times, where we actually remove the source of authority from Active Directory. I don't think you've seen this anywhere because I haven't seen anything online about this. So this is quite a unique case where we actually switch back and forth. You can see here it says Windows Server 80, where we actually changed it to a cloud native environment. This is the user objects. This will actually move everything from Active Directory on-premise to the cloud and make it cloud native also for the identity. So there isn't any dependencies on Active Directory anymore. It's all cloud. Let that sink in for a moment. It's all cloud. So no on-premise stuff at all.
So you're using SaaS applications for third-party tools?
Yeah.
And what about managing the usernames and the passwords? So do you use My Apps or another tool?
They actually use the Azure portal and also the GCP portal to actually provision new users and sign license and so on. So the IT support actually use Azure Privileged Identity Management. So when they come in the morning, they can actually elevate their accounts to user accounts, so we know how to trace who did what. And after that, they make the changes and revert back to being a normal user. As mentioned, they have around 250 users currently, so it's not that often that we have new users coming in. A couple of times a week.
One big advantage of this scenario is also we recently had KPMG visiting us to do our IT audit, and they don't know anything about this world. And you can just tell them, go in on Microsoft website and find the documentation you need, and then they just give up. So, so I can highly recommend that unless you really enjoy sitting with the
Drowned in a pile of shit.
Yeah. And what's really blowing their minds is when he actually said that it's now Microsoft's recommendation to use to don't change password on their user objects anymore. So what we actually did was actually, due to the fact that we had this issue with the file service and the Windows clients, we actually said password never expires on the on-premise objects, which actually allowed the user not to have any issues with the file service, the one file server they're trying to access still. And they're not quite that fond of that from KPMG. They still live in a, let me say, regular world where they had regular password change every 3 months or 2 months or password policies and so on. When we make this shift from on-premise to the cloud, the password policies are fully managed by Microsoft. We cannot change them ourselves. It's fully managed by Microsoft, which is also one of the good things. So everything is becoming more simple from an IT point of view. We can scale up and down as we see fit. We can buy new SaaS applications, test them. So yeah, everything is moving quite fast these days. To get back to how we actually bridge the gap, we have a couple of servers, basically 2 servers, because this C5 database is actually running on the IDS server. We have 2 servers left in the environment. So in case that actually the user actually need to have access to that, we can actually grant them access to the server using Azure Active Directory. We have groups that sync over to the managed directory service in Azure. I have a slide that actually shows this on the next slide, where we actually can grant access to the environment. So as you see here, it's basically, if you ever try to deploy Azure AD domain services, it's actually quite easy. You have 2 things that you have to do. You have to have a license for premium, and then you have to have a virtual network. And we have these 2 things, you actually enable to switch on this this feature, which actually automatically provisions 2 domain controllers that is fully managed from Microsoft. You can't sign into them. They are also upgradable from Microsoft. Microsoft manages all parts of that. You can make, for example, OU structures, you can also do some group policy changes, but it's still very limited what you can do.
One question.
Yeah.
Is there, what are some common features that are used today? Azure AD.
There's a lot.
Is it not?
Yeah.
Everything.
Currently, Microsoft doesn't have a complete list of what limitations they have, but something like network policy servers isn't supported. There's a long list, but it isn't currently available online in the documentation. But I know that the product group is working on actually highlighting these. So if you have to do a deployment or scenario, test it because there's so many limitations.
I think that goes a little counter to I think their marketing material.
Yeah, it does. So
That's a nice piece of
think of LDAP support and Kerberos support. Everything that has to do with storing or changing within the Active Directory itself, objects-wise, there's a large amount of limitations. The product group doesn't allow it to actually change these features. They actually resolved the issue with the remote desktop server. It wasn't actually working originally because they had a license thing that actually registered on the objects within Active Directory. That wasn't actually supported originally. It's supported today. Network policy servers is not supported. We actually discussed whether or not we can do that or use that for the Wi-Fi, and we actually decided to move on and go with the Web 2 because it doesn't require any user authentication or PC authentication. And from a risk point of view, we don't have any infrastructure. So basically, the Wi-Fi that we provide or the network we provide around is only for accessing the internet, basically. So
Okay.
we have some special network policies if you come from this location. It's more trusted than if you come from an internet point of view. So we do a risk calculation based on that as well. So, good question.
Thank you.
So, what we are left with currently is the remote desktop server that is running Azure in the legacy environment. We have an extra server because Visual Studio Team Service, the agent out there in Microsoft environment, is too slow for a developer to actually render or compile their software. It takes too long. They need around I think 60,000 IOPS for doing fast compiling of the software and release management. So we have provisioned a virtual machine, a quite large one, to actually cope with that. But once Microsoft actually provides a better agent in Visual Studio Team Services to do that, we'll actually remove this. We have two servers that we didn't actually expect because Nordic Aviation also bought Dynamics 365. And with that solution, the vendor actually decided to go with legacy software that actually required an on-premise server, which was the LaserNet OCR scanning. So we don't know why they actually don't use a cloud service for doing OCR scanning for Dynamics 365, but this is something that we are in dialogue with them to solve.
There's definitely a business opportunity for anybody who wants to develop an app for Dynamics 365 to do that. So, yeah.
We had so many issues with these guys because, first of all, they hadn't actually tried doing Azure AD joint devices before. They used the traditional network, so we had they used some kind of certificate authentication issue, had some inside the application. They actually told us that's because you do Azure AD joint devices and not do domain joint devices. And after doing a bit of troubleshooting ourselves, we actually was able to actually reproduce and say this step actually indicate that this is actually due to your software. So, so what have we learned? So as mentioned, the password part of actually moving to Azure is quite tricky. We actually recommend changing the users to password never expires as part of this because Windows, perhaps in 1803, it will be able to actually sync back the password properly. It isn't possible today. So it's an issue because they're out of sync with the on-premise domain. It actually requires you to change the password every 3 months, and that wasn't actually possible. We also found that, and we also had the Dropbox issue that, as we mentioned, we had a large amount of issues with actually finding proper backup solutions for a lot of stuff in Azure. We still have that, and it's still a challenge. And I'll probably speak to Christian Isse that's sitting down here up front afterwards. Now he's looking up, so to give some feedback to the product group around solving these issues.
How did you solve it?
We haven't solved it yet. We're trying to do different workaround using scripting.
Okay.
And it's really bad solutions. So it breaks all the time and the reporting, and we would just like a SaaS PaaS solution for actually doing it properly, preferably from Microsoft, but also a solution that will actually able to actually remove some or move some of the backups outside of Azure to a third-party platform. We don't actually care if it's Google, Amazon, or it's an on-premise solution, but just in case anything goes wrong, we're still able to actually have the business up and going in a week or so. And there was a question before regarding users and also employees.
Yeah, so that's one of the things we found when my guy he left his job and went for something else. I started looking for a cloud architect, and I guess you know that that's a very hard task, especially if you're sitting in Billund, because everybody who wants to work in Billund, they want to work with toys instead of aircraft. For whatever reason, I don't know. So we haven't really been able to find any cloud specialist or cloud architect, and as we were searching for new colleagues, this new journey progressed, and what we've found is that it's actually a whole new way of managing IT in the business, because you don't need any architects. From our point of view, of course, I have Peter, he's coming to visit us every once in a while, but when we are fully 100% cloud-based, I would say that we can run the infrastructure by having like an Intune person coming maybe once a quarter and just, finding out, okay, you have these 8 new features since the last time I was here, and enabling that, and maybe even at some point outsourcing the entire infrastructure would be very easy. So we were looking at, so what is it that the IT department is supposed to do? And we have been focusing a lot on saying, well, it's the end users, that's our clients, right? That's the reason why we even provide any infrastructure. So we wanted to supply more support. So we have scaled up a bit on that. So we deliver gold support package, I think, to our clients. But one of the needs that we see that we are finding is we need somebody who can bridge IT in the business much more than we need any architect or a cloud specialist or whatever. So as you know, it's no problem to deploy Microsoft Teams tomorrow with the telephone system and all that. The real issue is actually getting out there into the business and figuring out how does an HR department find value in using Teams. So that's what we're lacking at the moment, is somebody who can figure out what is it that they want in the departments. How can we make them work more agile and take advantage of all these new tools that becomes available like once a week. So there is definitely a transition in how infrastructure departments, in my opinion, will look if you go 5 years down the line. Or we don't really need an SQL cluster person to sit 24/7 and look at our environment anymore. So
you've seen a significant decrease in pressure on your IT staff?
We actually, for the past 2 months, I think we haven't had one third level, if you can put it that, support case at all, where they couldn't figure out it themselves, because it's just so intuitive to go in. If something is not working, people can call out from Skype, or they can print or whatever. It's very intuitive. We even have a student working at us, and he's deploying new users and setting up a lot of policies and stuff like that. So
What about the money?
Next question.
yeah, it's. I think this slide is actually very good to look at how it was in what I call the old days, but even in the hybrid scenario where you have 80% of my people doing maintenance, patching, making sure that the servers were actually running, and then we had 20% time left for innovation. And going back to what I just said, now we have like 80% time to do innovations instead. Of course, we can downscale the organization a lot, so you save on that. And then, of course, you have something else, which is a license thing with Microsoft. And we've chosen to buy the biggest license that we have, so we can gain a lot of value from all of the security products around.
E5?
Yeah, Microsoft E5. So which covers basically everything besides Dynamics 365.
We're buying it.
Sorry?
We're buying it all.
Yeah.
It's quite expensive.
So that's because that's one of the things we've been talking about moving in the cloud, but we're being a little bit nervous about because you sort of like you can't control the consumption of the services in the same way as you can as we are on-prem. And that's sort of like the pain we're going like, okay, is the price going to go through the roof then? Because people are just going to consume a lot of new services and things like that. And what was your experience there?
I haven't I haven't experienced that.
No?
But I actually had a visit a few months ago from a big Danish clothing company that wanted to go the same way as us, and they had some similar questions on, for instance, DNS. They said, well, I'm really reluctant on removing all of these services, because if something happens to DNS, it's nice to have a server down in the basement and I can just get a guy to go down and fix it. But I think that when you look at the cost for that license and cost for operations from the people you actually need to drive it, you need to take that into consideration as well. But we haven't seen any big growth in consumption. That maybe a little bit about the developers every once in a while, because they just have a tendency to click everything on. Yesterday after the keynote, I wrote a message on the JFK files story, and they already playing around with that stuff now. So.
Are there specific tools you are using for your cost control?
No, not
Because
really.
we've done the same journey last year, and Microsoft's offering the EA portal. They now got Cloud in, and they got Power BI reporting, but they all got different options and information.
We're using the reporting from Microsoft built in Azure, and also the product they actually acquired for billing insights as well, to see billing on a resource level. And we also see some requests on doing billing on tax level, but we currently, due to the lack of support for tax, we're doing it at a resource level.
But again, we're trying to, our main task is actually to remove the servers and all of that Azure infrastructure as well. I think a lot of people start with hybrid and then they just put all the servers in the cloud. And therefore I can see that you would like to see how much does it cost, but for us trying to remove that, it's basically coming down to the license.
Yeah. So it's definitely more expensive to have a hybrid environment than it is to have a cloud home environment, because you have a foot in each camp. So I think that generally.
Peter, are you also using Windows Defender Advanced analytic tools to level up the security, to protect the user data network infrastructure?
We're using all of the security products provided from Microsoft, also Windows Defender ATP, and we actually started using Azure ATP also, but due to the fact that we're actually removing domain controllers, we couldn't actually use that. And that is also one of the products that doesn't support Azure AD domain services as well. So, or NPS services. So.
My question is about the total running cost so far in your journey. What has happened to those? Your IT running costs? Have you kept them the same and just raised the innovation level like we saw before, or has it decreased or has it increased?
I would say generally it's decreased because we're removing servers, which is the more expensive part of Azure. So we see a decrease in with the amount of servers that we are removing. We'll see a decrease over time, which is also reflected in the billing.
But you haven't seen an immediate decrease because of the shutting down of the on-premise servers or something like that.
It's very hard to measure on the on-premise stuff.
I imagine that's why I was kind of trailing off in the middle of the question.
Yes.
All right.
What was the estimated project cost and time?
That's a question for you.
Well, we're in the lucky situation because we are, in that respect, a small company, and we are very profitable company. So we haven't, of course, we've been looking at cost, but it's not been the priority what the final cost would be. So I really can't exactly tell you what the cost has been because we've been doing a lot of trial and error in this. So sometimes we've been adding stuff that we found out, well, this may not be. For instance, like when we did the Dropbox migration, we found out that actually moving files to Dropbox is not that easy. So there was a guy in the infrastructure team who just bought the biggest servers in Azure he could find with solid state, the hard drives and all, and then put Dropbox on that. I forgot to shut them off again. And I can't recommend that solution.
But I'm going to build you as a customer, so that's why I'm interested in the price.
Yeah.
Okay.
So one of the most important takeaways from this session is that the journey continues, and as Microsoft releases features all the time, you'll still have to improve your infrastructure, your SaaS service, your PaaS services, security along the way. It's going so fast these days. So we actually discussed during like a quarterly meetup where we actually discussed the new features that Microsoft introduced and make a plan for actually implementing them in the infrastructure as well. The number 2 point that you should consider is actually cloud only is actually a possibility. It might not be for you in the short term due to the infrastructure you have running and the application, but just start your journey and get some experience because it is possible to move entire infrastructures in a medium-sized company to Azure and have a cloud-native infrastructure. Any last questions? Because we are nearly over time. Yes?
How many workstations do you have?
Around 250.
Or do you study the operating system and creating the template?
We're using Intune. We don't use templates. We don't use configuration manager. We get the laptop from the vendor on Revit. It's already with the Windows 10. So if it needs to be redeployed, we stick in a USB stick and just do the deployment from there. And actually Azure AD join it. When it comes Azure AD joined, once the user actually signs in the first time, the applications and the configuration is streamed onto the client itself from Intune. We had a look at the autopilot, if you know that, where you can actually register the serial number of the laptop with Intune and send out the laptop directly to the end user, but that doesn't work for us.
What about the policy of the administrator, local administrator? Are you changing the password by Intune?
Yeah, we have PowerShell scripts that does that for us. So, and also larger package that doesn't use MSI files. We use PowerShell for doing that in collaboration with Azure Blob Storage for large deployments and so on. So we have made different workarounds to make this work in a cloud native environment. Perfect. All of the ones that actually ask questions, come down and get a keychain if there's anyone left afterwards. And there's actually lunch now, but if you want, you can stick around for the raffle. But anyone that wants lunch now, with a lot of other people out there, you're welcome to leave now. But if you want to win this
Millennium Falcon. Stick around. Sorry.
Last question, because that's one thing that I've been fighting with in my organization is that if you go full cloud, you also invite single point of failure, access to the network. Have you had any issues with all of that?
Absolutely not. Never. And you can say if you go where the old infrastructure and the hybrid infrastructure is very much, clients connecting up to your infrastructure, and you need to keep that alive. This new world is much more client oriented. So even if it's like having an offline PC basically, and because of all, as long as they can authenticate to some of the third-party apps, and we haven't seen that. Luckily, we haven't seen that breakdown yet.
There was an outage a couple of months back with the Azure Active Directory, where one of the petitions in I think it's both actually in Northern Europe and also in Asia actually went down or corrupted for some reason. They have to have an article that we actually posted the reason why. But luckily we weren't not hit by that, but I know a lot of other companies in Denmark were hit by that issue. But they managed to actually resolve that issue, and the petition in Azure that was corrupted within a couple of hours, and then have everything up running around new.
But you're absolutely right. There is a single point of failure in saying we are putting everything in Microsoft's hands.
Yeah.
But because again we are a small organization, I've had, information that I think they can do it better than I could ever do it. So.
Again, it's up to the single organization. So. Okay, have everyone joined? Who wants to join? Perfect. Let's get started. Let's go. Anyone signing in now?
Yeah.
Good.